It was late at night. The rain was beating hard against the windows, and she was sitting alone in her rocking chair. Tears streamed down her face as she pressed against her chest a faded photo of the husband who passed away years ago. Suddenly she felt something different. The paw of an old, tired dog gently rested on her hand, as if saying, "You're not alone anymore." In that instant she realized that dog, rejected by everyone, had come to save her life. Nancy was 72 years old and had been living alone for 5 long years in her house in Worcester. Her house, which was once filled with laughter, conversations, and the aroma of fresh coffee in the morning, now breathed only the echo of her memories. The wall clock marked each second with cruel precision, reminding her that time doesn't stop for anyone. Every morning followed the same solitary ritual. She woke up at 6, prepared coffee for one person only, sat at the kitchen table, where for 43 years she had shared stories with Robert, her husband. His chair remained in the same place, as if at any moment he would appear through the door with his warm smile and gentle eyes. The scent of lavender still permeated the sheets, a habit she had maintained since she was a young wife. But now this sweet aroma only intensified the longing she carried in her heart. She walked through the house, touching the objects that were once part of a shared life: his favorite armchair, the books he read aloud to her on Sunday afternoons, the old radio where they danced in the living room on wedding anniversaries. Have you ever felt how a house can become too big when you live alone? Nancy felt this every day. The children's rooms, now adults with their own families in distant cities, remained untouched. Yellowed letters stored in drawers told the story of a family that had spread across the country in search of their dreams, leaving behind the matriarch who raised them with so much love. The afternoons were the most difficult. When the sun began to set, painting the sky with golden tones that she and Robert always admired together from the porch, loneliness weighed like a stone in her chest. She would sit in the rocking chair, a wedding gift that had withstood decades of use, and rock gently while watching the garden he cultivated with such care. The red roses still bloomed, but seemed less vibrant without his careful hands. The small herb garden they used in the kitchen grew wild, and she didn't have the energy to trim it. It was as if nature itself felt the absence of that man who loved her. There were nights when Nancy closed her eyes and could hear again the sound of the family gathered. She remembered Sunday mornings when the children were still small, and the house awakened with the noise of bare feet running through the hallways. Robert made pancakes, his specialty, while she prepared coffee and set the table. "Mom, tell that story about Grandpa and the rebellious mare," Emily, the youngest, would ask, always curious about family stories, and Nancy would tell, for the 100th time, about how her father tamed the most stubborn mare on the farm in Nebraska, while everyone laughed and asked for more details. Robert had a special way of making every moment seem like a celebration. On birthdays, he transformed the living room into a party hall with colorful balloons and loud music. At Christmas, he climbed on the roof to hang the decoration lights, always complaining about the Massachusetts cold, but with a smile on his face, seeing the family's joy. Do you remember moments like these in your own life? Those simple instances that at the time seemed ordinary, but later become precious treasures stored in the heart. But time passed. The children grew up, graduated, got married. Michael moved to Boston because of work. Emily followed her husband to the West Coast. Visits became less frequent, limited to holidays and special occasions. It wasn't for lack of love, Nancy knew that. Life had simply taken everyone in different directions. When Robert began to get sick, she dedicated herself entirely to caring for him. For 3 years, she was his nurse, companion, and greatest support. She watched him wither away gradually, but never lost hope that he would recover. In the last weeks he held her hand and whispered, "You were the best thing that happened in my life, Nancy. Promise me you'll be happy." She promised, but didn't imagine how difficult it would be to keep that promise. It was on a gray Thursday in autumn that Nancy had an unexpected idea. She had spent the morning organizing the dresser drawers, a task she invented to occupy time, when she found a crumpled flyer about an animal shelter that someone had left in her mailbox months ago. "Make a difference in an abandoned animal's life," the text said, accompanied by photos of dogs and cats looking for a home. Nancy had never considered having a pet. Robert was allergic, and with small children, the house already had enough activity. But now, looking at those photos of sad and hopeful eyes, something stirred in her heart. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe the need to have something alive around her, or maybe it was simply the desire to feel useful again. The following Saturday, Nancy put on her best coat, navy blue with golden buttons that Robert always complimented, and took the bus to the shelter on the outskirts of Worcester. It was the first time in months that she left home without having a specific destination or obligation to fulfill. The shelter was in a simple but clean building on Elm Street. The sound of barking and meowing could be heard from the street. A young woman, with hair pulled back in a ponytail and a genuine smile, received her at the entrance. "Are you looking for a companion?" asked the volunteer, whose badge indicated the name, Laura. "I'm thinking about it," Nancy replied, still uncertain. "I've never had an animal before." Laura led her through the shelter corridors, explaining about each animal. There were playful puppies running in circles, lazy cats stretching in the sun, young dogs jumping against the bars trying to get attention. They all seemed full of life and energy. "And that one over there?" Nancy asked, pointing to a more secluded corner. In a kennel somewhat apart from the others lay a female dog who seemed to have seen many winters. Her golden coat, once brilliant, now showed gray strands, especially around the muzzle. The brown eyes, though tired, still maintained a deep sweetness. She lifted her head upon noticing Nancy approaching, but without the euphoria of the younger animals. "Ah, that's Roxy," Laura said with a note of sadness in her voice. "She's been with us for 2 years. She's already 12 years old, and people always prefer the younger ones. She's a sweetheart of a dog, very calm and affectionate, but nobody wants an old female dog," Nancy completed, understanding perfectly. She approached the kennel and extended her hand. Roxy sniffed her fingers delicately, then touched her muzzle to the palm of her hand. It was a gentle touch, almost reverent, as if she knew that moment was special. "Have you noticed how older animals seem to have a different wisdom in their eyes?" Nancy felt this immediately. It wasn't the explosive energy of youth, but the serenity of someone who had lived enough to value kindness. "Can I go into the kennel?" Nancy asked. Laura opened the door, and Nancy sat on the floor, ignoring the discomfort in her knees. Roxy approached slowly, as if testing whether she was welcome. When Nancy extended her hand again, she lay down beside her and rested her head on her lap. It was love at first sight, or perhaps mutual recognition. Two beings who had known better days, who carried their own stories of loss and longing, found each other in that silent but profound moment. "She likes you," Laura observed, clearly moved. "Roxy doesn't do this with just anyone." "I think we understand each other," Nancy said, stroking the dog's soft ears. "We both know what it's like to feel alone in the world." 3 days later, Nancy returned to the shelter with a new collar and a heart full of expectations mixed with nervousness. She had spent those days preparing the house, bought food, bowls, a soft bed, and some toys, although she suspected Roxy had already passed the age of playing much. The taxi ride back home was silent. Roxy sat in the back seat, looking out the window with a serious expression, as if evaluating her new reality. From time to time, her eyes met Nancy's in the rearview mirror, and she offered whispered words of encouragement. "You're going to like the house, Roxy. It has a big garden where you can sunbathe, and the kitchen always smells like cake on weekends." When they arrived, Roxy got out of the car with dignity, sniffed the new air, and followed Nancy to the front door of her house on Beacon Street. She opened the house, and Roxy entered slowly, exploring each room with the care of a respectful guest. The first days were a delicate dance of mutual adaptation. Nancy established a routine: breakfast at 7, followed by a short walk around the block. Roxy ate slowly, chewing each piece of food as if it were a special delicacy. In the afternoon, she would lie on the porch, watching the street movement with the patience of someone who has time. But it was on the first night that Nancy realized she had made the right decision. She was in bed, leafing through a book she couldn't concentrate on reading, when she heard the soft sound of Roxy's paws on the stairsteps. She appeared at the bedroom door, hesitant. "Come here, girl," Nancy called, patting the mattress lightly. Roxy jumped on the bed with the agility of a much younger dog and curled up at her feet. The warmth of her body and the rhythmic sound of her breathing created a sensation of comfort that Nancy hadn't experienced in years. For the first time since Robert had passed away, she didn't feel completely alone in the darkness of night. The following weeks brought a gradual but profound transformation. The house that once echoed only with the tick-tock of the clock now had new sounds: the click-click of Roxy's nails on the wooden floor, the soft noise of her bowl being pushed across the floor, and occasionally a contented sigh when she settled in her favorite spot, a rug in the living room where the afternoon sun formed a golden square. Nancy discovered that having a companion completely changed the dynamics of her days. She could no longer stay in bed late feeling sorry for herself because Roxy needed to go out for her morning walk. She couldn't forget to eat because Roxy depended on her for her meals. For the first time in years, someone needed her again. The walks became the favorite moment for both. Nancy had chosen a route that passed through Elm Park, the city's central park, where there were benches under leafy trees. Roxy walked beside her without hurry, stopping to sniff posts and greet other dogs with the education of a true lady. Have you noticed how a walk with an animal makes us see the world differently? Nancy began to notice details that had gone unnoticed for years: the shape of clouds, the smell of flowers in the park, the smiles of children who stopped to pet Roxy. Dorothy, the neighbor next door, was one of the first to meet Roxy. She was watering the plants when she saw Nancy passing with the dog. "My goodness, Nancy! What a nice surprise. How long has it been since you had a dog?" "Actually, it's my first," Nancy confessed, "and I think it was one of the best decisions I've ever made." Roxy, as if understanding she was being introduced, sat politely and offered her paw to Dorothy, who laughed delightedly. "How well-mannered, and what sweet eyes she has. She seems to understand everything we say." And it was true. Roxy had a special way of looking at Nancy, as if she really understood not only her words, but also her feelings. When she was sad, Roxy would approach and rest her muzzle on her knee. When she was excited, her tail would wag with discreet enthusiasm. One afternoon, while Nancy was organizing old photographs, a task she had avoided for years, Roxy sat beside her, watching silently. She was holding a photo from the last wedding anniversary with Robert, when he was still healthy. Tears began to flow without warning. "I miss him so much, Roxy," she whispered. 43 years together seems like it was too little time." Roxy moved slowly, resting her head on her lap. She didn't try to distract or cheer her up. She simply stayed there, offering her silent and warm presence. It was exactly what she needed, not advice or empty words of comfort, but the simple company of someone who also knew loss. Because Roxy also had her story. Laura had told her that she had belonged to an elderly lady in Riverside who had passed away, leaving her without family to care for her. That's why she understood instinctively what it meant to lose someone important. In that moment, sitting on the living room floor surrounded by photographs of a lifetime, Nancy and Roxy established a connection that went beyond simple companionship. They were two survivors, two hearts that had known deep love and devastating loss, finding solace in mutual solidarity. The afternoons began to have a new ritual. After lunch, Nancy would sit in the living room armchair with a book, and Roxy would settle on the rug at her feet. Sometimes she would read aloud, adventure stories she used to tell the children when they were small. Roxy listened attentively, her ears moving from time to time, as if she were following the narrative. Have you ever had an animal that seemed to understand your emotions better than many people? Nancy discovered that Roxy had this rare ability. On days when longing pressed harder, she wouldn't leave her side. When Nancy was more excited, she would play a little more, bringing one of her toys or running a few laps around the garden. It was Roxy who inspired Nancy to care for the garden again. She liked to lie among the flowers, enjoying the sun rays filtered through the tree leaves. Seeing her there, so peaceful and content, Nancy felt the desire to beautify that space even more. She started slowly, pulling some weeds and pruning the bushes that had grown too much. Roxy accompanied her, lying in the shade, supervising the work with the seriousness of an experienced foreman. Sometimes she would get up to investigate some hole that Nancy was digging or to smell the newly planted flowers. "What do you think of these violets here, Roxy?" she would ask, knowing she wouldn't receive a verbal answer, but always getting an attentive and approving look. The garden was reborn gradually. Nancy planted new rose seedlings, Robert's favorite herbs, and some flowers that attracted butterflies. Roxy became the official guardian of this small paradise, barking politely at cats that tried to use the flower beds as private bathrooms. The neighbors began to notice the transformation. Helen, who lived across the street, came over one day to compliment, "Nancy, what a beautiful garden. It's been a while since I've seen you taking care of the plants, and this dog is adorable." "This is Roxy," Nancy introduced with pride in her voice. "She's my new gardening partner." As if understanding she was being praised, Roxy wagged her tail and offered her paw to Helen, winning another admirer in the neighborhood. Roxy's presence opened doors that Nancy didn't even know existed. During walks, she met other dog owners. There was Frank, a retiree who walked with a beagle named Lucy, Rose, who had an elderly poodle named Buddy, and even some young people who stopped to talk and pet Roxy. "She's very well behaved," commented Jessica, a university student who always greeted Roxy in the park. "My mother is thinking about adopting a dog. Where did you two meet?" Nancy told about the shelter, about how she found Roxy on a day when they both needed companionship. The conversation flowed naturally, and Nancy discovered that she hadn't talked to new people in a long time, hadn't talked about subjects other than medical appointments or bills to pay. Isn't it amazing how an animal can connect us with other people? Roxy became a social ambassador, creating opportunities for Nancy to reconnect with the world around her. The mornings in the park became an informal social gathering. The owners would meet on benches while the dogs interacted and played. Nancy discovered fascinating stories. Frank had been a Navy veteran and told adventures from his travels around the world. Rose had granddaughters who lived in Colorado and visited during vacations. A young couple was planning a wedding and wanted their dog to participate in the ceremony. The first winter with Roxy was special. Nancy bought a wool blanket for her, dark blue with small golden stars. Every morning before the walk, she would cover her carefully, making sure she wouldn't feel the Massachusetts cold. "Ready, my princess," she would say, adjusting the blanket. "Now we can face the cold." Roxy patiently tolerated the extra care, although sometimes she seemed a little embarrassed by so much protection. But Nancy had discovered the pleasure of caring for someone again, and Roxy was the beneficiary of all her repressed maternal affection. On the coldest nights, she would light the fireplace, something she hadn't done in years. Roxy would lie on the rug in front of the fire, and Nancy would settle in the armchair with hot tea and a book. The crackling of the flames created a cozy atmosphere that transformed the house into a real home again, not just a structure where someone slept. It was on one of those nights, when rain was beating hard on the windows and wind was howling outside, that Nancy had a revelation. She was petting Roxy, who was dozing peacefully at her feet, when she realized she no longer felt that weight in her chest that had accompanied her for so long. The loneliness hadn't completely disappeared. She still missed Robert, still wished the children could visit her more frequently. But now there was something more. There was purpose. There was joy in small moments. There was someone who depended on her and who, in return, offered unconditional love. That Christmas, for the first time in a long time, Nancy was excited about the prospect of the festivities. Michael and Emily came to visit, bringing the grandchildren. The house that had seemed too big for one person now filled again with laughter and conversations. "Mom, you're different," Emily observed while helping in the kitchen. "More alive." "It's Roxy," Nancy replied, looking out the window where the dog was patiently playing with the grandchildren in the garden. "She gave me a reason to wake up every day." Michael, initially skeptical about his mother's idea of having a dog at her age, was won over by Roxy's gentle personality. "She's very calm, Mom, and she really seems to like you." "We understand each other," Nancy said simply. "We both know the value of a second chance." The grandchildren, especially little Sophie, who was 6 years old, were enchanted with Roxy. She demonstrated infinite patience with the children, letting them pet her, brush her fur, and even try to teach her tricks she already knew, but pretended to learn again. "Grandma, can Roxy sleep in my room tonight?" Sophie asked. "If she wants to," Nancy replied, "but I think she prefers to sleep in my room. It's where she feels safest." That night, after everyone went to sleep, Nancy and Roxy took their last walk of the day through the garden. The Christmas lights that Michael had helped hang created a magical atmosphere. "Thank you, my friend," she whispered, stroking her head. "You gave me my family back. Not that they had gone away, but I had forgotten how to receive them." It was on a March afternoon, almost a year after Roxy's arrival, that the moment Nancy would never forget happened. She was organizing the closet when she found Robert's last shirt, a blue shirt he wore on Sundays, and that still carried, very subtly, his perfume. The emotion hit her like a wave. All the tears she had contained, all the pain she had learned to live with, returned with full force. She sat on the bedroom floor holding the shirt against her chest and cried like she hadn't cried in a long time. Roxy, who was sleeping in the living room, woke up immediately. As if sensing that she needed her, she went upstairs and entered the room. She found Nancy on the floor sobbing, and without hesitation lay down beside her, placing her head on her lap. "I miss him so much, Roxy," she cried. "Sometimes I think I'm better, that I can move forward, but then—" Roxy didn't move. She stayed there, solid and comforting, absorbing her tears with the infinite patience of someone who understands that pain needs to be felt to then be healed. After a long time, Nancy calmed down. She looked at Roxy, whose brown eyes watched her with a tenderness that went beyond human understanding. "You miss your previous owner too, don't you?" she asked, stroking her ears. "But you taught me that it's possible to love again without forgetting those we loved before." In that moment, Nancy understood a profound truth. Roxy hadn't come to replace the love she felt for Robert. She had come to remind her that her heart was big enough to harbor new affections without diminishing the old ones. The following months were ones of flourishing for both. Nancy enrolled in a gardening course at Worcester's Senior University, something she had always wanted to do but never had the courage. Roxy accompanied her to practical classes, becoming the official mascot of the group. "Your dog is an excellent student," the professor would joke. "She pays more attention than some humans here." Nancy also began volunteer work at the same shelter where she met Roxy. She helped with the older animals, those who, like Roxy had been, were frequently ignored by adopters. Her experience with Roxy made her a passionate advocate for senior animals. "They have so much love to give," she would explain to potential adopters. "They've passed the destructive phase. They know how to value comfort and security. They're loyal and grateful companions." Roxy accompanied her on these visits, as a living example of how an old female dog can bring joy. Her calm and dignified presence won hearts and helped other animals find their forever homes. Have you noticed how helping others can heal our own wounds? Nancy discovered this working at the shelter. Each animal that found a family, each love story she helped create, warmed her heart in a way she hadn't experienced in years. On the second anniversary of Roxy's arrival, Nancy organized a small party. She invited the friends she had made on morning walks, some neighbors, and, of course, Laura from the shelter. "You saved 2 lives that day," Laura said, watching Nancy and Roxy interact, "hers and yours." "Actually," Nancy replied, offering a special treat to Roxy, "I think she saved mine first. I was drowning in memories and loneliness, and she threw me a life preserver." The party was simple, but full of joy. Roxy, wearing a blue bow tie that Nancy had bought especially for the occasion, received congratulations with the dignity of a true lady. The neighborhood children sang happy birthday, and she even blew out a special candle for dogs. That night, after everyone left, Nancy and Roxy sat in the garden to enjoy the sunset. The flowers she had planted in the first year were lush. The trees that Robert had planted decades ago provided generous shade, and the air was perfumed with the aroma of jasmine. "You know, Roxy," she said, "when you arrived on that rainy night 2 years ago, I thought I was doing you a favor. But you're the one who gave me the most precious gift. You taught me that it's possible to start over at any age, that love has no expiration date, and that sometimes the family we need comes from where we least expect." Roxy looked at her with that wise and loving expression she had learned to love, then rested her head on her lap just like she did that first night when she was crying alone in the rocking chair. 3 years after that encounter at the shelter, Nancy was unrecognizable, in the best possible sense. Her house had become a home again, full of life, visits, and purpose. The garden was a small work of art that attracted butterflies and birds. She had lost 15 pounds walking with Roxy. Her skin had a healthy glow from someone who spends time outdoors, and her eyes sparkled with a joy that many thought had been lost forever. Roxy, now 15 years old, had gained some more gray strands, but her eyes maintained the same sweetness and wisdom. She walked a little slower, slept a little more deeply, but still climbed into bed every night to keep her Nancy company. Their routine had become the perfect rhythm for both. They woke with the sunrise, took a peaceful walk around the block, returned for breakfast on the porch while watching the birds in the garden. Afternoons were dedicated to volunteer activities at the shelter or classes at the senior university. Evenings were sacred, simple dinner, a silent conversation in the garden while the stars appeared, and then the comfort of the fireplace in the living room. It was on one of those special nights that Nancy finally understood what Robert meant when he asked her to be happy. It didn't mean forgetting the past or pretending that pain didn't exist. It meant finding space in her heart for new loves, new adventures, new purposes. It meant discovering that even at 75 years old, there were still wonderful surprises waiting for her, and the greatest of all those surprises was lying at her feet, snoring softly. An old and wise female dog who had arrived on a rainy night to remind her that it's never too late to start over. While stroking Roxy's soft ears, Nancy smiled to herself. The loneliness that once seemed insurmountable had transformed into fullness. Not because she no longer missed Robert, that longing would always be part of her, but because she had learned that the human heart has an infinite capacity to love, and that each new love doesn't diminish the previous ones, it just multiplies them. The next morning, like all others, Nancy woke up with Roxy's cold nose touching her hand. "Good morning, my companion," she whispered, as she had done every morning for 3 years, but this time there was something different in the air, a sense of gratitude so deep that it made her stop and really see what her life had become. She got up slowly, prepared coffee as always, but instead of going straight to the porch, she stopped at the living room window. The garden was magnificent on this spring morning in Worcester. The roses she had planted in honor of Robert bloomed vigorously next to the violets she had chosen because of Roxy. It was a perfect mixture of what was and what is, living proof that it's possible to honor the past while building a future. Roxy appeared beside her, as she always did when she sensed she was being reflective. Without saying a word, she opened the porch door, and the two went out for another walk. But today, instead of following the usual route, Nancy decided to pass by the shelter on Elm Street. She wanted Laura to see how well Roxy was doing, how happy they both were. "Nancy, what a wonderful surprise!" Laura exclaimed upon seeing them arrive. "And look at Roxy. She looks more beautiful than ever." It was true. Despite her age, Roxy had a special gleam in her eyes, silky and well cared for fur, and a dignified posture that radiated contentment. "She saved me, Laura," Nancy said simply, "when I think that I almost didn't come that day. I imagine how many people are out there, alone like I was, not knowing that the solution to their loneliness might be right here, waiting for them." While they talked, Nancy observed the kennels. There were new animals, some young and playful, others already with gray fur and tired looks. Her heart especially ached for an elderly female dog sleeping alone in a corner. "What's her name?" she asked, pointing to the dog. "Bella. She's 13 years old and arrived last week. The family moved to California and couldn't take her," Laura explained sadly. "She's a sweetheart, but you know how hard it is to find someone who wants an old animal." Nancy knew this story well. It was exactly what had happened with Roxy. She looked at her, who was watching Bella with gentle interest, and an idea began to form in her mind. Not today, maybe not tomorrow, but who knows in the future. Her house was big, her heart even bigger, and if she had learned anything with Roxy, it was that shared love multiplies, it doesn't divide. "Would you mind if I visited Bella a few times?" Nancy asked, "just to keep her company. I know how hard it is to stay here waiting." Laura smiled, understanding perfectly. She would love that. And who knows, maybe you can help find someone special for her like you found in Roxy. While walking back home on Beacon Street, Nancy reflected on how curious life is. 3 years ago she was a lonely woman who thought her days of loving and being useful had ended. Today she was an active person, surrounded by friends, an active volunteer, and the owner of a dog who adored her. More importantly, she had rediscovered her ability to make a difference in the lives of other beings. "You know, Roxy," she said while they stopped at Elm Park to rest a bit, "I think I understand what the secret is. It's not about not feeling alone. It's about realizing that we were never really alone. There's always someone, or some animal, waiting for our company, just as we wait for theirs." Roxy looked at her with that expression she had learned to interpret as approval, then gently licked her hand. That afternoon, while preparing dinner, Nancy hummed a song that Robert used to play on the guitar. It wasn't a sad melody, but one full of sweet longing and gratitude. Roxy dozed on her favorite rug, occasionally opening an eye to make sure she was still there. The house was filled with the usual aromas, coffee, garden flowers, and something indefinable that only exists in homes where there's a lot of love. When night came, they followed their sacred routine. Simple dinner on the porch, watching the sunset paint the Massachusetts sky gold and pink. Then the final walk through the garden, where Nancy watered the plants while Roxy supervised, always alert to any suspicious movement that might threaten their little paradise. Finally, the cozy living room, the fireplace lit, and the two settled in their favorite places. "You know what impresses me most, Roxy?" Nancy said, stroking her head while she settled at her feet. "It's how you taught me that age is just a number. When we met, I felt old, tired, as if my life was already over. But you showed me that there were still so many first times ahead, first time having a dog, first time doing volunteer work at my age, first time discovering that I can make new friends at 72 years old." The rain began to fall outside, gently tapping on the windows. It was a gentle rain, not like that storm the night they met. Nancy closed her eyes and allowed herself to remember that moment, her crying alone in the rocking chair, and then the magical sensation of a warm paw resting on her hand. "You arrived exactly when I needed you most," she whispered. "And the most incredible thing is that I also arrived exactly when you needed me most. It's almost as if destiny had planned our meeting." Roxy sighed contentedly, and Nancy realized she was almost asleep. But before surrendering completely to sleep, she did something she always did. She lifted her head, looked deeply into her eyes, as if wanting to make sure she was well, that she was happy. Only then did she close her eyes and relax completely. It was in that moment that Nancy had her final revelation. During all these years, she had thought she was taking care of Roxy, giving her a home and love. But the truth was that they had taken care of each other. They had saved each other from loneliness, abandonment, the feeling that their best days had already passed. Together, they had discovered that life always reserves wonderful surprises for those who have the courage to open their hearts to them. While the rain continued its soft melody outside and the fire crackled in the fireplace, Nancy smiled to herself. Tomorrow would be a new day, full of possibilities. Maybe they would visit Bella at the shelter. Maybe they would meet new friends in the park. Maybe they would simply spend the day caring for the garden, two companions enjoying the simple joy of being together. "Thank you," she whispered to the universe, to Robert, who was somewhere taking care of her, to the chance that led her to the shelter that day, and especially to the old female dog who slept peacefully at her feet. "Voice, thank you for reminding me that it's never too late to start over, that love has no age, and that sometimes life's best gifts come wrapped in unexpected ways." And so, in a house that had become a home again in Worcester, Massachusetts, a 75-year-old woman and a 15-year-old female dog slept peacefully, knowing they had found in each other exactly what they were looking for. Not just companionship, but family. Not just an end to loneliness, but a new beginning for love. Not just a better today, but the promise of many happy tomorrows ahead. The rain continued falling softly throughout the night, like a gentle blessing over that house, where two lonely hearts had discovered that, together, they could create all the joy they needed. And when the sun rose the next morning, it found Nancy and Roxy already awake, ready for another day of simple adventures and infinite love. Have you ever felt that an animal brought comfort to your most difficult days? The story of Nancy and Roxy reminds us that true love knows no age, and that sometimes the family we need most arrives unexpectedly at a moment when we almost give up believing in the magic of new beginnings. If this story touched your heart, Like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories of love and hope like this one.